Namaskaram. My name is Srinivas Samadanali. Last time I spoke about economic growth of India in the last 20 years, from 2003 to 2023. And I talked about GDP, FDI, exports, and stock market. And in continuation, there have been some comments and responses. So I just wanted to continue this conversation instead of responding individually. Let me create a follow-up video. So that is the intent. This is about, as usual, quick introduction about me, my intentions and disclaimers, and quick recap on this one, what we kind of discussed in the last part one video. So I'm not going to run through this number. You can take a quick glance of it. And if you want to, you can go back and watch the other video. Okay. So let me jump to uh, the the next part two content, where I'll talk about the some of the comments that came, right? So, so I'm going to talk about how how Indian growth compares with the other major countries, right? So I've taken BRICS, double I, that includes Indonesia as well, and the West. And then I will also be talking about inflation and associated oil prices and government debts, right? So then we'll also talk briefly about the other overall major global crisis that happened during this 20-year period. Okay. Um, Again, some quick, context setting. I want to be as less biased as possible, and I will give credit to whichever the regime or the period it is, as long as there are some positives as well, and also look things a little sympathetically if things have not gone well. Uh, let's look at the growth numbers of different countries. Right. So, in the last one, I compared the countries, India's performance over 20-year period. Instead of looking at year by year, I looked at all the way from 20. Showed the number from 2000 onwards, but focused on 2003 to 2023. 2003 is the baseline for the starting point for the UPA, and end 2013 is the end point for the UPA. Whereas for UPA, sorry, for NDA or Modi ji's government, it is 2013 is the base starting point, and the 23 is the end point. So if you see here, I have seen given numbers for 2000 onwards, just for a little bit of context here. What I've taken in, so I've taken Brazil, Indonesia, India, Russian Federation, South Africa, and China. Okay, so you can see the numbers. I've also color coded. You can see that two columns have a lot more greens in this, right? You have China, which was green all the way here. In fact, it has been positive all along. That they have not seen any recession in the last 23 years, but their growths have slowed down. Similarly, India started a little low after in 2000 onwards, and it took a while for it to come up. The reason in this 2000, 2001, numbers a little low is because that's when we started taking up. And I think in 2000, we were impacted with Kargil war in 1999. And also in 2001, there was, dot-com bust, right? That's why the numbers went down. It's not only in India, it's in many parts of the world as well. I'll show in the West these numbers for the West as well. So I started with this comparison. Then I thought, let me add some Western countries to it as well. So then I went to added in Germany, UK, and USA. Now we can see the bigger context. So obviously, India column and China columns are a lot more green. Indonesia columns are light green, and rest of them are somewhere in between. In fact, a lot of rest of the countries, either they're yellow or amber. USA, you can see that some spots you have high growth, some spots mediocre growth, etc. And 2021 they grew really well. Same thing with UK and Germany. So I'm showing here are the numbers, average numbers, decadal averages from 2004 to 13. So and then the next row is for 2014 to 23. So you can see in the top, there are a lot more greens. In fact, that means that the most countries were growing on an average in this period compared to the next 10 years, right? In the first row, so you see the India average, from 2004 to 13 on an average, this one growth rate was 6.8%, while the same thing in 2014 to 23, it's 5.9. 5.9 is still good, compared to other countries. They've all slowed down. If you see the West, right, they have very similar decadal numbers. In fact, US has much better growth numbers from 2014 to 23 because US has suffered hugely because of the financial crisis. Right? If you see the uh, average growth of all these countries 4.3%, whereas same thing in the next 10 years is 2.6%. If you compare it, definitely India has done well in the last 10 years. So however, I still give credit to India. It's not that it happens automatically. You can see in many other countries, 3.0, so South Africa, Brazil, growing much slower, despite their having their economies being much smaller, and also they have a lot of high economic activities for maybe more than 100 years compared to India. Whereas Russia is a resource intensive, resource rich country. They export a lot of energy products and also a lot of military products as well. So in this context, definitely India has done well during UPA as well as during NDA as well. So there is some truth that majority of the countries were growing during this period, whereas the growth was lower in the same 2014 to 23. However, let me highlight the fact that the good periods of global growth only lasted for 4 years, from 2003 to 2007, maybe for 4 or 5 years. Afterwards, you can see the pretty much most parts of the world have they have low growth or negative growth. So we have to remember that so it's not that entire UPA period was and it was a very rosy global and it had all the growth happened automatically. It is not the case. In fact, being a big major economy, you have to do extra work to attract the investment as well as to manage the growth. Whereas China is an exception. They really grew in double digits for a long time, and their growth slowed down of 2009 onwards. Okay, so China Beijing Olympics, post Olympics, they slowed down, and then their economy is also tied to Western economies, right? So whether it's the US or Europe, obviously even the demand for a Chinese product reduced in US or Europe, they have to reduce the production, and their production is linked to the resources supplied by the various countries in South America, Africa, and even India and Australia, right? So let me look at it. So in this context, if you see this, definitely UPA, both UPA and NDA have done in terms of growth rate. Some people asked about the inflation. So yes, I had kind of forgotten about the high inflation period during UPA, and then went and looked back how the inflation numbers were in India and also in the world and in China, just as two additional references. So as you can see that India definitely had much higher inflation during UPA period, especially during between 2009 to 2013. Okay, so that is the period. In fact, 2 years it was above 10% double-digit inflation. And then it touched nearly 10% and started coming down after 2013 onwards. You can see that 13 onwards, it started coming down and the trend continued. So there were some actions taken. At the same time, you have to see that this whole India's inflation is in line with the global inflation. Right? It went up during 2007, and then it started slowing down and went up and down, and finally the global inflation also started coming down. So and then it stayed there, relatively lower, and then it picked up during the COVID period, and then post-COVID period. Whereas especially the global inflation, in fact, overshot India. It had overshot India in two periods. I think it's one time it was during 2007, another time during year in post-COVID period. That way, somewhere some amount of good management has happened in India versus the rest of the world. So what contributed to this high inflation during UPA? Obviously, the numbers were very high. These are all macroeconomics are all very difficult to control and manage. So irrespective of which regime it is, so you push the lever, you see its effect only after 1 or 2 years, sometimes 3, 4 years down the line. So if you see here, major contributor for the inflation anywhere in the world is the oil prices. The oil prices were very high, in the period from 2004 onwards, and they were, if you see the 2005 onwards, it have been pretty much above $100 for almost not 4 years, almost 8 to 9 years. These numbers are inflation adjusted. You can check these numbers here. And at one time, it even peaked $200. And I think this is again because of the inflation adjusted. Otherwise, I think it reached 180 or 160 or $180. That was really high, and government had to kind of do some amount some control on that. So issued oil bonds to subsidize the oil prices so that it would not impact the poor people with higher inflation. That was the thing done. And with that, so the prices started coming down. It's again with global prices as well as a local action. This is one factor, one major factor in influencing the inflation. One was global inflation was also higher, and then the oil prices was the major contributor. And there was other factor as well. We'll talk about that. That is the higher government spending. Okay, so during after US financial crisis, UPA government wanted to continue India's growth trajectory so that so it would not have a long-term impact on India, and also leverage the situation for further growth. So one thing they did is government started investing in a lot of infrastructure projects, and also encourage private companies to invest in infrastructure projects. That's why you see a lot of private companies coming into power, roads, ports, and then power transmission, and airports and other things. Right? This was the first time where major and telecom, the private parties were coming in the infrastructure in a big way. These companies became really, really aggressive and overconfident. They borrowed a lot of money and they invested. Many of the projects came on board. Unfortunately, the demand didn't pick up very well. And in the process, the returns on their investments didn't happen well. So they started, these assets became non-performing. They were not able to repay the loan. So that's how the NPAs grew during UPA too. Right? So if you see here, government debt as percentage of GDP, it was quite high during Vajpayee period. It went up during Vajpayee period and started coming down. It was quite low, and then started going up again sometime around 2015 onwards. So this increased government debt. So a lot of that went to creating infrastructure. So golden quadrilateral was created. Yes, it has benefited the economy. In fact, that is one of the backbones of the growth for over the last many years. And UPA continued that highway expansions of highway, improving the highways. The golden quadrilateral was only 4-lane highway, and there were no flyovers and other things. So the UPA took that. Many stretches they increased to 6 to 10 lanes, and built a lot of flyovers, and then built the northwest and east-west, north-south and east-west corridors, etc. Right, so a lot of infrastructure was built in UPA period as well. Similarly, so in the Modi period, again the government borrowing started increasing, and now the government debts as percentage of GDP is probably is the highest so far we have. And again, we can debate whether it's good or bad. We don't know. So only time will tell. With that borrowed money, a lot of programs have been created, and a lot of infrastructure things have been initiated. We'll see how that will turn out. But now, the most of the risky infrastructure projects are pretty much built by government funding with debts, with a lot of borrowing. So this again, this little bit of summary again with the high borrowing right? You build the infrastructure. Sometimes those infrastructure building could be well ahead of time. So demand might not catch up easily, and the return could be quite low. So many times it creates crisis. Sometimes it creates bubbles, and then crisis later. We have I don't know how many of you remember in the late 90s there was a 97 there was a Asian financial crisis. Most of the Asian tigers, so the ASEAN countries, they ran into huge trouble because they built a lot of infrastructure, created a lot of triggered a lot of economic activities with very high debt level, and then it burst. And it had a really, really lot of cascaded effect across Asia and to some extent rest of the world as well. So post that, there have been a lot of controls and kind of, how much debt need to be there, etc. So hopefully we don't get into that situation. But the similar situation was there in Japan. In 90s, they built a lot of infrastructure with high debt, and that they didn't give result. In fact, Japan has lost its economic growth for the last 3 decades. They were called last decade and last 2 decades, and now you have to call it last 3 decades. China has built a lot of investment of infrastructure, so it's very unknown how those infrastructures are performing in terms of the returns on investments. They have a lot of ghost cities, created with a lot of debts. It has created a huge real estate bubble, which has burst already. Okay, so we need to be a little bit careful in terms of increasing the debt. So this is what I just wanted to convey here. So this all high borrowing high debt is not necessarily great. Only time will tell how this have been are going to perform in the future. At the same time, so I think we need infrastructure as well for further growth. So goods and people have to be transported, and there are various things need to be built to be ready for the future growth. Right, and also we need to be efficient globally to take some pie out of this China plus one strategy. India is not the major gainer as of now. It is so Mexico, Vietnam, and the Poland could be the way gaining something as well, and then Thailand, Indonesia. There are ASEAN countries will gain significantly, and India will gain some amount of it, but as of now, it's not. We are not the major gainers. Okay, some major financial crisis that happened in during 2003 to 2023, because we all have short memories, we forget what had happened. We only remember the recent challenges, so whether it's COVID or Ukraine crisis and recent Israel Gaza war. But we have forgotten, many of us have forgotten that there was major financial crisis between 2008. In fact, end of 2007, it started happening. 2008 to 13, world saw a lot of trouble. So first it was US financial crisis. It took nearly 4 to 5 years to kind of unwind itself. And then similar housing bubble started, burst in Europe. It was called PIIGS, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain, where a lot of houses were built because these are more sunny as well as better, more warmer weather, pleasant weather and pleasant geography. A lot of vacation homes were built, a lot of retirement homes were built. It created a real estate bubble. Ireland had some banking financial challenges as well. So all these things, there was people were suspecting whether European Union and Euro as a currency would survive or not, and that uncertainty continued for nearly 4 years. So with that, so the world was struggling to pick up speed anywhere from 2008 to 2013. I can go back to the heat map what I showed earlier. So let me quickly go here. You can see that after 2008 onwards, you see the Western countries, they're all in the kind of negative growth pretty much, except in Germany in 2010 it grew 10 and 11 it grew a little faster, but subsequently you can see that they've been struggling to either sustain the low growth or they to avoid the recessions. Okay, so then high oil prices from 2005 to 13, whereas 2011 to 13 average price was above $2,120. Whereas we had brief oil prices in during Ukraine war, maybe a couple of months. but that was managed because China and India and many other countries, they continue to get Russian oils, bypassing payments in dollars. It's good. It's not just China. Russia agreed to sell in local currencies, not just with India. It also, China is the major buyer of oil from Russia, and India is the next one. We are buying oil in rupees and this one. Yes, it's a good thing, but this is not the first time. Let me tell you this: during 11 to 13, we were buying, sanction imposed Iran, and in 2012 and 13, Iran agreed to accept Indian rupee as payment terms for the oil. So this hype of okay, we cut the deal despite the pressure from the West or criticism from the West. That's not, it's kind of it's overhyped. This is not the first time we are doing. And the other thing is West, despite doing this criticism externally, internally, they knew that if India, China come to these other countries, the Middle East and other countries to buy the source oil instead of Russia, what would happen? Because now the Europe is not no longer buying Russian oil, so they are now coming to Middle East to buy the oil. So that spiked the prices. And if you and India and China to continue with the Middle East, heavily rely on the Middle East, price would shoot up further. The US was, I mean, West was already struggling with high inflation after COVID. They gave a lot of free money to the citizens, and that triggered the inflation. And if the oil prices go up further, it would really, really almost kill their economies. That was the situation. With that, though they criticized externally India and China buying Russian oils, they didn't, they didn't do too much. They didn't impose sanctions on India or China because that would hurt them. And then, so this China post Beijing Olympics, we have to remember it looked people had almost it has faded away. Till that time, China was growing enormously. One, because of the global growth of the economy, the China had become has become the global factory for the world. And but after Olympics, the lot of construction activities stopped, and then because of the crisis in Europe and US, they had to reduce the production of their products as well. It had cascade effects on in Africa, South America, Australia, and India as well. So we have I don't have to talk about COVID 19 20 to 2022 Ukraine war, which impacted the edible oil thing as well as the petroleum, right? So with that, I would like to say that both NDA and UPA and NDA, they have done manage the economy fairly well. In fact, if you go back and see, the only major economies in the world in this last 20 years have been kind of continuously having positive growth. One is China and the other is India. Maybe to a smaller extent, the lower extent, it is Indonesia, right? So with that, so both have faced challenges. Whether it's COVID and this one in the COVID and Ukraine war in the recent times, where in the US and European financial crisis, high oil prices during UPA, and then the inflation. NDA has performed well. That because two reasons again. So one global, the inflation was lower, and then the oil price were lower. So that is the advantage NDA had. And I'm sure they would have done some things which helped to kind of manage this one. Also, they didn't give a lot of free money to the citizens, unlike the West, right, which didn't trigger the inflation in the country. And I think I would like to say that we all the buffers we had in terms of the food grains and other things which were been kind of designed over decades, for Food Corporation of India's godowns and the all the distribution mechanisms we have, right? Those have helped to kind of contain the food inflation, whereas there were riots in US and all to get the food during the COVID. Okay, so it's though we managed it, a lot of that is because of the our ability to manage the food and other things for this, so, for longer period for a huge population. So again, if you either we should call both decades as UPA and NDA decades either miracles, or we should be neutral. I don't think there is any miracle happened in the last 10 years compared to previous 10 years in India. That's a kind of overhype. I think the most media, even some of the Western media, give a lot of create a lot of hype around this. Oh, extraordinary growth in the last 10 years, which is nonsense. I don't. They have to look at the data much more in a much more balanced way. With that, thank you. I would request to watch my videos and comment, and I will continue my talks and discussion later.